In the early years of the 11th century, England was a kingdom balanced between continuity and chaos. The Viking Age was winding down, yet the scars of Scandinavian invasions remained fresh. Danish kings had ruled England only a generation earlier, and the Anglo-Saxon nobility was still regaining its footing. Amid this backdrop, Edward the Confessor ascended the throne in 1042. Edward's reign was peaceful compared to what had come before, but it was also politically fragile. Though king, Edward relied heavily on the support of powerful nobles, particularly the Godwin family. Earl Godwin of Wessex, and later his son Harald, wielded immense influence. In many ways, they were the real power behind the throne. But Edward had no children, and with no direct heir to secure the throne, the question of succession loomed large over England. What seemed like a domestic uncertainty would soon invite foreign ambition. And into this uncertainty stepped Harald Godwinson, the most powerful man in England, born not of royal blood, but of Anglo-Saxon might. His rise and the trials he would face in the year 1066 would define the fate of a nation. Harald Godwinson was not born into royalty, but he came from one of the most influential families in Anglo-Saxon England. His father Godwin, Earl of Wessex, was a remarkable political figure in his own right, rising from relative obscurity to become the most powerful earl in the kingdom under King Canute, the Danish monarch who ruled England in the early 11th century. Godwins had served Canute loyally, earning his trust and being rewarded with lands and the earldom of Wessex, one of the wealthiest regions in southern England. Even after Canute's death and the complex succession crises that followed, Godwin managed to retain his power under Edward the Confessor. By marrying into noble families and securing key alliances, he ensured the Godwin family would dominate English politics for decades. While there is little surviving detail about his childhood, we know that he received a traditional noble upbringing, likely educated in Latin and Old English. As Harald came of age, he gradually took on more public roles. His family's prominence ensured him a place in national affairs, and he began to establish a reputation for leadership, military competence, and political skill. When Godwin died in 1053, Harald inherited his title as Earl of Wessex. It was a powerful position, second only to the king in wealth and influence. Now, at the height of his status, Harald effectively became the leading noble in England, advising King Edward and managing the kingdom's southern heartlands. But his power did not go uncontested. As his political power grew, Harald's personal life also followed the customs of the age. Though he eventually married Edith of Mercia, a union that helped secure a political alliance. Together they had several children. Though not a royal family in the continental sense, the Godwins were now England's most dominant dynasty. On the night of January 4th, 1066, King Edward the Confessor died at his palace in Westminster. After more than 2 decades on the throne, his passing marked the end of the House of Wessex's direct royal line. With no children, no formally named heir, and growing foreign claims on the English crown, the kingdom stood on the edge of uncertainty. The very next day, January 5th, the Witan, England's royal council of earls, bishops, and leading nobles gathered in haste. They had to choose a new king, and their decision would define the course of English history. Their choice fell not on a distant foreign claimant, but on the man already holding the reins of power, Harald Godwinson. Harald was crowned on January 6, 1066, likely in Westminster Abbey. He was the first king in centuries not of royal blood. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Edward had named Harald as his successor on his deathbed, and the Witan accepted this declaration as legitimate. But across the sea, others saw this as a usurpation. In Normandy, Duke William was outraged. He believed that Edward had promised him the throne years earlier, and that Harald himself had sworn to uphold that promise. According to Norman chroniclers, during Harold's visit to Normandy in 1064, he had pledged an oath on holy relics to support William's claim. Harold's coronation, therefore, was not just a disappointment, it was an insult and a challenge. William immediately began preparing for war. He secured the support of his barons and began constructing a fleet. At the same time, to the north, Harald Hardrada of Norway was making his own plans. His claim to the throne was based on an agreement made years earlier between Magnus of Norway and Harthacnut of England, who had promised to leave their kingdoms to each other should one die without an heir. Though Harthacnut had died in 1042 and his successor had been Edward the Confessor, Hardrada believed that agreement still gave him a valid claim to the English crown. Hardrada was no ordinary rival. He was a seasoned warrior, a veteran of battles across Europe and the Mediterranean. His reputation was formidable, and he now formed an alliance with a powerful insider, Tostig Godwinson, Harald's own brother. Exiled from England after a rebellion, Tostig had turned against his family and now pledged loyalty to Hardrada, offering both military support and inside knowledge of English defences. And so two formidable armies began to prepare, one in the Duchy of Normandy, the other in Norway. Both would soon sail toward England. Meanwhile, Harald, newly crowned and fully aware of the danger, began assembling the fleet, England's local militia system, drawing men from shires and boroughs across the kingdom. In mid-September 1066, King Harald Godwinson received word that Harald Hardrada had landed in the north, accompanied by Tostig Godwinson, Harald's estranged brother. The Norwegians moved quickly, capturing Scarborough and pressing toward York. On September 20th, they defeated an English force at the Battle of Fulford, just outside the city. York surrendered soon after. Harald had no choice. He gathered his forces and marched north, covering nearly 190 miles in just 4 days. On September 25th, Harald's army met the Norwegians east of York, near the village of Stamford Bridge. Hardrada and Tostig were caught off guard. The result was a fierce and bloody confrontation. The English crossed the bridge under enemy fire. Both Harald Hardrada and Tostig were killed. The Norwegian army was shattered. Battle of Stamford Bridge marked the end of the Viking Age in England. Harald had defended his kingdom and eliminated one of his greatest rivals. But his victory came at a cost. His army was exhausted and still recovering when new reports reached him. From the south, William of Normandy had landed. On September 28th, just 3 days after Harold's northern triumph, William's fleet arrived at Pevensey on the Sussex coast. He brought with him not only Norman knights, but also mercenaries from across Europe, men lured by promises of land and spoils. William wasted no time, establishing a fortified position and beginning to raid the surrounding countryside, forcing Harald to act. Once again, Harald gathered his forces and began the long march, this time south. He arrived in London by early October, recruiting new levies and reassembling those who had not marched north. On the morning of October 14, 1066, the two armies met near the town of Hastings. The battle lasted for most of the day, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. According to sources, the tide began to turn when some Norman units feigned retreat, drawing parts of the English force down the hill in pursuit. These breaks in the shield wall gave William's cavalry opportunities to attack more effectively. Late in the day, as the sun began to set, Harald Godwinson was killed, either struck by an arrow to the eye, as depicted in the Bayeux tapestry. With the king dead and their line broken, the English army collapsed. William had won the battle. On Christmas Day, 1066, William was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. The coronation was symbolic not only of conquest, but of continuity. William promised to uphold English laws and traditions, though in practice he would remake the kingdom under Norman rule. Harald Godwinson's death marked the end of Anglo-Saxon kingship in England. His reign had lasted just 9 months, but in that short time he had defended his realm from 2 invasions, fought 2 of the most decisive battles in English history, and become a lasting figure in the national memory. England would never be the same again. Norman rule brought a new aristocracy, new governance, and a permanent shift in culture, language, and law.